Welcome to A Slice with Dice, where education meets inspiration and leadership meets real life. I'm Corey Alderdice, Executive Director of the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts. With 2 decades in school leadership, I'll share what I've learned from walking the tightrope between policy and practice, especially when it comes to doing right by gifted students and their futures. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. Let's talk about something you might not expect to hear this fall. That applying to the Ivy League and even other top 25 universities might actually be a little less competitive than it's been in recent memory. I know, that sounds strange. We've all grown used to hearing about record application numbers, plunging acceptance rates, and even how valedictorians and perfect test scores are turned away in droves. Now that's still true, but there are some big shifts happening right now that could make the odds slightly more favorable for this year's high school seniors. There are 3 main forces at play here: international enrollment, standardized testing, and demographics. Each one tells part of the story, and when you put them together, you start to see why this year feels a little different. Let's start with international students. In a typical year, anywhere from 10 to 25% of seats at the most selective universities go to students from outside of the U.S. Now, they bring tremendous talent and global perspectives, but they also face hurdles, and those hurdles are what just got higher. Recent changes in U.S. visa policies have created very real uncertainty. Visa issuances for student applicants dropped sharply in early 2025, and in some months fell more than 20% year over year. Now, some experts are projecting that international enrollment could decline by 15 to even 30% this year. And let's be clear, that is unprecedented. For a place like Harvard or Columbia, that could mean fewer international applicants and, by extension, a few more spots available for domestic students. It's not a night and day change, but even a small shift can move the needle when you're talking about schools that admit fewer than 5% of their applicants. Now let's add in the second factor: testing. For the last several years, most elite colleges went test optional. Now, that opened the floodgates for applicants who might have thought they had nothing to lose. Without a test requirement, it became easy for tens of thousands more students to click submit and roll the dice. The result? Application records shattered, but the admit rates dropped even lower. And that's changing. 6 of 8 Ivies, along with most of the top 10 national universities, have now returned to requiring either the SAT or the ACT. What does that mean for you? Well, 2 things. First, the overall applicant pool is likely to shrink because students with weaker scores will simply not apply. And second, if you do have strong scores, they now set you apart once again. After years where GPAs were almost universally high and hard to distinguish, a 1550 SAT or a 35 ACT can once again send a clear signal to admissions officers. Again, that doesn't guarantee admission, but it absolutely helps to cut through some noise. And then there's demographics, the so-called enrollment cliff. Now, after the 2008 recession, birth rates in the U.S. dropped. Fewer babies means fewer high school seniors now. And we're at the front edge of that decline with the classes of 2025 and 26. Now, national data show the number of high school graduates has started to fall, especially in the Northeast and the Midwest, the regions that traditionally supply many Ivy League applicants. On top of that, the percentage of students who even choose to go to college right after high school has slipped from around 70% a few years ago to just 62%. Some are going straight into a job market. Others are weighing the cost of college and deciding differently. Fewer seniors, fewer applicants, fewer enrolled students. All of that translates into admissions offices having to admit a little more generously to fill out their classes. And you can already see hints of this. For the class of 2029, those are the students who will begin college in fall 25, acceptance rates at some Ivies actually ticked up for the first time in years. Yale rose from 3.7 to 4.6%, Dartmouth from 5.3 to 6%, Brown from 5.2 to 5.7, and granted, these are still minuscule percentages, but they're moving in the opposite direction from what we've been used to, and hey, that's significant. Now, I want to be clear, this does not mean that Ivy League admissions are suddenly easy, because they're not. If anything, they remain among the most competitive processes you will ever encounter. But what it does mean is that the pressure may be easing ever so slightly. If you're a strong student with solid test scores, thoughtful essays, and a clear sense of fit, this could be one of the best cycles in years to take your shot. And hey, there are other ripple effects too. Some top schools are quietly expanding their class sizes. Yale, for example, admitted over 160 more students than the year before. Others are recalibrating their policies in response to last year's Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, which could further shift the composition of incoming classes. And because the application numbers may plateau rather than climb endlessly, schools will be watching their yield rates, which means how many admitted students actually say yes, more closely than ever. And that dynamic can give families even more leverage and sometimes more generous financial aid packages as colleges complete to secure commitments from admitted students. So if you're a senior this fall, here's the bottom line. You're entering a cycle where conditions might actually tilt ever so slightly in your favor. The sheer math of it, fewer applicants, a smaller international pool, mandatory test scores, means you do have a real chance to stand out. Now, that doesn't mean you should apply recklessly or assume the odds are suddenly in your corner. It means you should approach the process with focus, with strategy, and with the confidence that the landscape is shifting ever so slightly in your direction. And for families, it's worth keeping this perspective in mind. Yes, it's still daunting. Yes, the acceptance rates are still tiny. But your student isn't facing the exact same odds as the class just 2 or 3 years ago. They're a little better. And that's not something we've been able to say for a long time. So as you head into this season of applications, remember this. The odds are still narrow, but they're not impossible. And this year, they're tilted just a little more in your favor. The numbers do tell us the tide is shifting. What was once an ever-closing door is cracking open, if only slightly. But that small change matters. It means your hard work, your voice, and your story may have a clearer chance of being heard. So don't waste the opportunity. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next week, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.